All right, here we are. The epoxy is now set up, including the donuts. We're moving on to the feet. Here's your character. Line your character up again so you can figure out where you want to bend the legs to become the feet. So I can see that with this lined up, the bend for his heel is right about there. And I'm going to bend it right there. And just to keep on checking to make sure that your puppet stays at the right height. So you're going to want to make a nice sharp bend where the ankle is going to be. Never use any tools at this point, because a tool will make a mark in that ankle that will turn into a break really fast, because it's likely that your character is going to walk, and a walk takes a lot out of a puppet. So what we've got here now is our armature lined up to our drawing with the legs at the correct distance or the correct length. So the next step is we're going to talk about feet. What you want to do is you want the character's tie downs, which are the screws used to tie your character's feet to the table, down towards the toe, so that when you're doing a walk, you can have the character's heel land and then walk the toe down as you're animating. Now that I have the character's legs bent at the correct distance, so I know where to add the feet, we have to figure out the length of the foot by, again, referring to the drawing. So it's about half that distance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this wire and I'm going to wrap it back on itself. At this point, if you're going to be bending some of the thicker wire down towards the toe, it might be difficult for you to do without tools. And it's a safe spot to do it because this part of the foot is going to be deep inside some epoxy. So you can carefully bend this back as a loop. This is what it's going to look like, a loop like this here. And what that's going to be doing is going to go around what is called a T-nut. And I will pop a picture up of a T-nut in the video. And this wire is going to wrap around the T-nut. This is a little bit of a tricky event to do while holding it in the air. So I'm going to do it down here towards the table. This wire kind of is wrapped back upon itself, so you can kind of almost see the shape of the foot. And there's some areas around the T-nut, right around here, that the wires can go around. So I'm going to line that up. I'll try to do this because I am left-handed, so it makes your life a little hard to see what's going on. Okay, there are these little tines that are on the T-nut. I'm going to straighten one of them out. Having pliers is a very important thing right now because the T-nuts are made out of steel and they're difficult to bend, where the wires are made out of aluminum. Okay, so that's going to make my life just a little bit easier to put the T-nut there. Now it's a little difficult to see, but I'll hold this upside down like that. So I have the loop and I have this T-nut and I'm going to put it right in there. Okay, so I have both of the feet bent like that, and now I'm going to try to fit these. It takes a little bit of time. It'd probably be dull watching me do it, but it's about wrestling this part of the T-nut, this upper part right here, wrestling that into this loop that we've created for the feet. So I will try to do that now. Okay, so I've opened up these little loops a little bit more, and I've got some copper wire right here. It's very thin, and this copper wire is just makes life more convenient when you're working on the feet. So what I'm going to do is take the T-nut and wedge it in place at the toe of the foot, like so. Okay, and now what's important about the feet is to make sure that the T-nut is flush and square and flat to the bottom of the foot. I'll try to hold it in place there. So you don't want it to stick up or out. So I'm going to just take this little piece of brass and wrap it around just once or twice. And it's almost kind of a placeholder just so that I can kind of wrestle both feet on without them falling off. It's just a little bit of a weave in there. There's no specific way to do it. You're just trying to make your life a little easier. You could probably almost use tape if you wanted to, Because this, again, when you're doing your feet, it's a two-step process. So you're going to hold it in place like that, and then twist that little wire until it's kind of set. Now it's there and it's not falling out, which is great. So now I'm going to do the other foot, and then we'll move on to the epoxy. Okay, I'm mixing up some epoxy for the feet. This is a two-stage process. The first thing you want to do, similar to the way we did our the first part of our armature, is we just want to lock these feet onto the armature, lock them in place. It's important that you get this epoxy deep inside and around all the wire and the T-nut initially, but you do not want to get any in the threads of the T-nut. Because then it would be impossible for your character to be tied down. Also, be careful not to add too much epoxy, or too little for that matter, but you don't want the feet to get gigantic. There are different size T-nuts you can use, and there are other processes for making feet we can talk about later. Okay, so now I've got my epoxy. I'm going to dip my fingers, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the character on a surface like this, and I'm going to kind of make a little snake of epoxy and shove it down in between the armature wire and the T-nut. Okay, again, you're not trying to get it all done in one fell swoop. You're trying to basically lock it in place, because what we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of epoxy in there, and then from there we will let this set up. And then we'll go in and refine the foot. So be careful not to go beyond the flat surface of the T-nut, and do not go into the turnings, the threads where the screw is going to go. Always have a little tool with you. If it could be a toothpick or it could be your X-Acto blade, but it'll help manage any errant pieces of epoxy. Okay, so now I've smushed the first part of the epoxy into the feet of the character. It looks a little bit ugly right now. You can kind of see that there's wire sticking out and string, but we're going to deal with all that later. So you can see that the holes still go all the way through the T-nut, so we can lock this character down. The epoxy isn't everywhere, but we don't want to move this around too much so that the T-nuts get loose. Once this sets up, we'll take it to the next step and finish doing the epoxy. What we're going to do is add the rest of the epoxy to the feet, still making sure that you avoid the holes where the threads are for the tie downs. So I have some epoxy left over here, and you should have your drawing out to make sure that the feet don't get larger than your character's feet in the drawing. But what I usually do is I'll lay it flat on the table and put some epoxy down, and then just kind of squeeze it into the nooks and crannies, once again, I know I use that term a lot, of the armature. Now you don't want to go beyond the toe, because you're going to want to be able to bend that foot. This character has really tiny feet, so it might be difficult to do that, but the main idea is to go in there and to carefully put more epoxy in between the T-nut and the wire, because you want to make this character bond very nicely to that T-nut, because it's going to be screwed to the table and supporting the weight of the character. So there are these things called brass inserts, threaded brass inserts, which you can make from some pretty tiny feet. And if you remind me, I will send you a link as to where those are, or where those can be found. Okay, so I'm going to finish adding some epoxy. Now you could add it to the bottom, but what's important is that you find a nice smooth surface once you add it to the bottom. So I'm going to use this ruler, and I'm going to add a little water to the ruler, and then I'm going to push down on the foot so that the epoxy doesn't go beyond the level of the T-nut. Can you see that when I did that? Yes. So I'm going to hold it down here like this and kind of burnish it back and forth, and then the T-nut's right here, and you don't want to get beyond that. So this, so just make sure that the wires are covered. You don't want it to get big. You want to keep it small. And you also want to make sure you don't go anywhere near the ankles. All right, so this epoxy ends here in the middle of the foot. If you start putting epoxy here, he will not be able to bend his leg when you do your walk. So stay away from the ankles. Now you can also put a little bit of electrical tape at the base of each ankle just to kind of help protect it from any scratching or anything while you're building your puppet. But for right now, it's a simple shape for the foot, and just to make sure it's secure to the puppet. I'm going to put a little bit here on the bottom, and once again smooth it out using this surface right here. If the feet look a little off center, eventually you can just twist the leg or twist the wire so that they are center. What's also very important is to double check to make sure that the legs of your puppet are the same length. You should really do that before you start locking these things on. I happened to bend it at the correct angle, and I was very careful with it, and that's something you have to take care of. So there's the feet. Double check that you didn't get any epoxy down into the holes where the tie down is, because that's where the screw is going to go to tie your character down to the table. All right, so that's the feet of the stop motion puppet. There's a lot of other techniques for covering the feet and using different hardware, but that's the T-nut version of it. The next thing we're going to do is work on the hands.